The following video is part of my reconstruction project. That is, I have been going through old footage filmed quite a while ago and attempting to recompile it into something kind of usable, in advance of updating the channel format slightly to be a little more efficient, a little less time-consuming, and a little more interesting. Mainly to be a little more fun and to be actually achievable rather than long, boring videos where I start a project that sounds cool and then it doesn't work and I declare it a success. So, I don't know what's in this video because I'm making this announcement in advance of going through all that way old material footage. Note that the quality is not great because I keep breaking cameras. I have like 3 or 4 and I haven't figured out one that works yet. Hopefully I'll figure that out in the future.
But probably not.
Synchronize. New camera. Who's this? This is me. Hopefully it's fixed some of the issues. I know for a fact it hasn't fixed none of them because I'm looking at the camera right now. It cost me an entire $15. And it has patterns that make it look like it has speakers or microphones. There's 2 small holes. I'm also looking at myself now because I connected it to my computer this time. You may notice that I have circles. They're very sharp and it just cut my finger when I dropped it. Oh well, I'm relatively puncture resistant. So today, I feel like doing some art. So the first thing I need to do is get these circles, pound them out with a hammer. But my table isn't really suitable for that, so I bought myself a paver. Not to be confused with a brick. They are very different organisms. Pavers go on the ground. You walk on them. Bricks are used to build buildings. This is concrete. Bricks are ceramic. Oh, my hammering wrist is getting tired. Okay, they're relatively flat. Then I'll look it. Now what I want to do is remove the coating, because these rounds came from cans, not can knots. So cans are actually covered on the inside with a weird plastic liner, which makes these not oxidize. It makes them not contaminate the food with whatever they're made of, which is probably steel. I'm hoping it's steel because this project kind of hinges on that. How do we get that liner off? Well, I have an idea. I have 2 ideas. I'm going to do both, even though one will probably work and then the other one will also work. This is stripper. Now, I've spent a surprising amount of money on stripper here, but this one is unique because it is non-volatile. It doesn't contain volatile organic compounds. It's not a solvent. I've used it before. I don't know how it works, but I know it does. Now, normally you cover the table, but the worst it can do to this table is make it slightly cleaner. It's viscous. Oh, it's milky and creamy. Interestingly, it has a smell, but it's not like a strong chemical smell. It smells kind of like cleaning solution, like soap, kind of, almost. Now it just has to sit for a while and strip. Well, although the stripper has been highly effective at cleaning my desk, and this brand is very good for removing paint, it seems to have very little effect on these. And that's not a totally unreasonable assertion. It's designed to work on paint. Paint is chemically very different than, it's not universally across all plastics. Whatever is on cans is apparently very durable, which is not unreasonable to think. I mean, it has to be on cans to keep the food safe. It might, for all I know, it's probably polyethylene. Polyethylene is basically immune to just about everything. It's like big wax molecularly. So, I have an alternative for this. Always check for spiders. my neighbors didn't hate the noise before, they're about to. The next step should be interesting. I can finally plug this thing in. This is a welding device. I'm going to weld 2 of these to this metal rod, hopefully. I've got the welder ready. I've got the mask ready. I don't know if this will blow up the camera. But that's why we got a relatively cheaper camera. So, let's see if I even remember. I've never actually welded anything before successfully. I got this mask on. Protect my eyeballs. It's one of those auto darkening ones, so when it sees a bright light, it never mind. You'll get the. Well, ultimately, I was going to say it all worked, but then it just fell and destroyed itself. But it basically can't work at this point. I've never successfully welded with this machine before. I've had this machine for years, never used it. It can't weld cans because cans are too thin. They just disintegrate. So the heat of the arc, it could probably weld this to something else, but this just falls apart. So those are all torn up now, and they couldn't actually bind, because the whole point of welding is to kind of liquefy the metal a little, but this just vaporizes. So I can't use welding to hold these together. I will use glue instead. I got it looking pretty okay. That looks like a fine wall-hangable sculpture. The problem is, it's not finished. That it needs to have a finish applied to it. It's not rusty or actively decaying. Notice I've tied together a large number of dissimilar metals. I have copper, tin, antimony, aluminum, steel, galvanized screws, all stuck together. So what I'm going to do is corrode it. Now how am I going to do that? Well, it just so happens that I have this. Decaying soil from my kitchen compost, the same stuff that I use for the, I don't know which one needs to be done first. The concrete's behind me right now, brewing in the same solution. It's a mixture of a considerable number of peanut shells, because I've eaten those recently, human hair from every time I cut my hair, topsoil, which is largely manure and dirt, some potting soil, fragments of paper from the shredded mail I've got, several pieces of onions, surprising number of maggots, mites, coffee grounds, crushed up paper, old tea, pot of human hair in this sample. I got it from deep in the bin where it's extra smelly. I'm going to take this and I'm going to insert it in there. But dirt doesn't really have any effect on metal, at least not quickly. That's why I have this water. So that's ordinary water. First, what I'm going to do is make that water a little more acidic by adding the white. Then I'm going to give all these microorganisms a boost with this. Sugar. That should power their metabolism pretty quickly. Part of what tends to affect metal, though, is not just bacteria. Bacteria don't decay metal, except they do. What I want those bacteria to do to the metal requires sulfur. That sulfur is highly corrosive. This is not sulfur, fortunately, or that would have been really bad. It's magnesium sulfate. It's Epsom salt. Throw some of that in. What's that going to do? Well, do I have a whiteboard to explain it? Do I need to explain it? Basically, it's going to accelerate the sulfur metabolism, producing hydrogen sulfide at a much faster rate, especially after that sugar hits. These bacteria are going to go crazy. That has an effect on metal. This is a metal rod. I'm going to use the aluminum rod for this one. And one interesting fact of these elements I've chosen is that they're all non-toxic. That's entirely drinkable. It would taste really gross. It did just taste really gross. Weirdly not as vinegary as you'd expect. So that this soil won't be contaminated. It'll just have a lot of magnesium sulfate, which is a fine magnesium supplement for soil. One other thing that I do want to have added to this, which will require some sort of iron. I'm hesitant to use this because it's a pretty okay piece of metal. I'll just use the curved end of it. So, it's going to have cathodic protection in that right now it's just sort of sitting there in an electrolytic rotting solution. What it needs is electric current. I happen to have this. All I need to do is connect negative to the piece and positive to this electrode. Net-wise, that will cause a flow of ions. Positive ions, which are metal ions, will flow away from positive and toward negative. Now, what does that mean? That means I got to get a paper clip, and I got totally lost. So what was I saying? Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the slightest. All it means is that it's going to have an electrical charge in the muck, which is hopefully going to, that'll work, hopefully. Ions will ideally flow into the solution toward it, making it bigger rather than smaller, which would be the other way. Is that iron flowing into the soil, regardless of whatever it is, it just puts more iron in the soil. That's not toxic to plants. Versus copper, which is very toxic in its salt form, would form a carbonate, which would be super bad. There is copper stuck in there, but it's on the negative side, which means the copper will be pulled back into itself and be incapable of leaving the solution. So, runs on 12 volts from the wall. The wall is 120, but this is a 12 volt power supply. Now I just gotta wait. I'll top this off with more dirt, and then I will let it wait a little bit until it begins to show chemical changes. At which point, it will begin to develop a patina finish, but I want to. I'll also spray the top part down with water. Got to keep the whole thing wet all the time to encourage rust.
Alright, here's what it looks like while it's processing. It's pretty apparent that it has generated a significant amount of bubbles. Also, it smells interesting. I did switch that with this, which is connected to 300 watt computer power supply. So it all comes through that extension cord. So it has a lot more power running through it, and it certainly is doing a thing. So let's see if that does anything at all. An unfortunate part about working with biological muck is that you can't see through it. So I can see it's very clearly rusting on the top part, but as for the part that's under the muck, I haven't the foggiest.
Well, an unusual amount of foresight on my part, I haven't taken it out of the container. That's a very bright light. It's blinding me slowly. Like feces, but a little bit more metallic. Okay, the rotten egg odor is distinct of hydrogen sulfide. In pretty high concentrations, bubbly, bubbly, bubbly. As was probably noted in the intermediate video, I switched to the 300 watt power supply to get more juice. One thing I did notice, though, is that this is no longer acid, or it's yeah, it's turned base because the magnesium sulfate, as it electrolyzes and sticks to the cathode, turns into magnesium hydroxide, which is basic, and it neutralizes itself, kind of. Oh, a bubble. Ooh, that's not good. So, two, it has broken down the anode somewhat, or the cathode. It's broken down everything somewhat, so this is very conductive, probably very toxic, very stinky. When I connected the high wattage power supply to it, it cooked, and the resistors keep it from burning itself up, but they were hot. I was spraying water on them, and they were just boiling that water off. And considering the actual power supply is made of wood, it smelled quite nice. But now I'm going to pull it out, and we're going to see what it looks like. First, I'm going to tug on this line and pull out, I'm going to have to cut it. Ooh, disturbing it was a bad idea. It smells like diapers just exploded everywhere. Even though this one would have held oxygen generally in its vicinity. I'm going to rinse that off and see what happened to it. Well, it don't smell great. This one was on the positive side of the reaction. So metal, so this is the anode, metal is positively charged as cations. That confuses me. Beans. In electricity, the anode is positive and the cathode is negative. In ions, the cations are positive and the anions are negative. So the anode, the cations leave, which causes this to lose all its cations and the iron begins to dissolve. You can see it's gotten thinner, rougher. You can't see it. It's gotten a rough surface because it's actually started to pit and dissolve. Interestingly, that won't happen on the other side because that's where all the cations are going. Metal's flying off this and into this muck. It's doing the opposite on the other side, although I did plug it in backwards for like an hour, 3 hours. It's been nap. Probably a bad idea to take a nap while this thing is boiling hot, but hey, hydrogen sulfide isn't flammable. It's very flammable. Also toxic. Now let's pull out this piece. You can see that the part exposed to air has developed a substantial amount of rust. Ooh, this is an interesting development. Is that right there, a little difficult to see, possible to see. Notice how this metal, this iron, is turning green? Green rust. It's a thing. It happens when iron is exposed to anaerobic conditions in hydrogen sulfide. So, in order to fully get a picture of what this looks like, I will need to rinse this whole thing, disconnect the power line to it, and we'll see what it actually looks like. So the green rust is this portion here. That's not hugely stable outside of the anaerobic environment. So that's probably going to just turn into regular rust. The organic material, the wax that covers the can, is falling apart on the anaerobic side. So, one of these little things did fall off. I'll glue that back on. The glue is decaying, which is interesting to see. So the anaerobic side of the iron is primarily a combination of green rust and this sort of black rust, which is a type of oxidized iron. There's a strong chance that hydrogen, because it produces hydrogen on this end, the hydrogen's corrosive to steel. It dissolves in it. So this is probably mechanically ruined if you were to try to build a house out of it. Aerobic side is regular rust. This one's kind of split 50-50 with a... Interesting that it's dissolving. The aluminum piece was primarily outside and exposed to air. That's where the electricity was hooked to. It's not hugely damaged inside. It's a little browned in the center. The copper, though, the copper don't look so good. Both the copper and the tin on that wire there have darkened substantially. The tin is no longer shining white. It is, the thing's still leaking dirt. It's still very dirty because the dirt's not going to come off unless I put it in the dishwasher or something, which I might do. it's supposed to be dirty. Like the idea is to dry it like this and then have the dirt permanently affixed. Not as much hydrogen blistering as I had hoped on the steel, but that's not going to happen with this level of hydrogen in this time period. The reason the copper and such has darkened is because of the hydrogen sulfide. It has formed a patina of a combination of slightly corroded copper, and the black stuff is copper sulfide. The hydrogen sulfide in here, when it hits, so that's part of the reason why this turns green, is because copper or hydrogen sulfide hits iron, hits metal, turns into iron sulfide. Iron sulfide is pretty unstable. It turns into iron sulfate, which this now contains a ton of. Iron sulfate is green. It's a green colored material. Conversely, copper sulfide is slightly more stable. It's not the most stable. It's probably contaminated this whole dirt. It is black in color. So that's why that has developed this combination of colors. So I'm going to let it dry, but as a decoration now, that seems quite an adequate coating. It's hard to get the symmetry of it on the camera because it's not symmetrical, because it's not supposed to be. It's also because the camera's tilted slightly. But yeah, I can hang that on my wall. That would look cool, wouldn't it? And I got to do some chemistry. So, interestingly, doesn't smell like rot. Smells like metal. Smells like beer because it has sugar and it's fermenting and it smells oddly tasty, but you don't want to drink